Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to our panel today on specifications, standards, tokens, and bundles. Oh my. My name is Robert Bosley. I will be the moderator and host for this panel. Before we get started, as always, we want to remind everyone that we are recording this webinar. We plan to post recordings and slides so you can review them later. We do retain the rights to rebroadcast and distribute this. So by participating today, you are agreeing to that your contributions become part of the recording. This includes any video, audio, chat, or Q&A. So today, our panelists from the Naval Academy, Summer Gentry, and I hope I said that first name right, TJ Hitchison from University of Northern Iowa, and Sharona Krinsky from Cal State LA. I'd like to have each of the panelists take a few minutes to introduce yourselves and explain your part of your presentation. But before we get started, we did have a recommended reading for specifics grading. We have a link here. Again, this slide deck will be shared later on. But this is a recommended reading that we highly recommend. Goes into a lot of great detail about exactly how and what specific gradings is. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to you, Summer.
Hello, thanks so much for being here. I'm Summer, and I don't know how I was placed on this panel. I wouldn't call myself an expert, but I have been using specifications-based grading for about 5 years in my courses. And I guess I will mention a couple of things that I've already learned. Can we go to the next slide? During the course of this conference. Here's the text in my syllabus that describes how I'm going to implement standards-based grading. And I had been using this 4-point scale, 1, 2, 3, and 4, where 3 is passing, or what we would call mastery, and 4 is like excellent. And I've decided through hearing what everyone else had to say to change this and not to give this 4 for excellent anymore, because it turns out that it didn't really weight much in my grading scheme, but the students were really super focused on like getting from a 3 to a 4. And the only difference there was those kinds of minor errors that we talked about yesterday, like, you know, adding wrong or missed a sign here and there. And so I didn't like how that grading scale, assigning a different score to those, made my students focus on those kind of errors rather than on the more summative things. So that's one thing that I've seen so far, and maybe we can go to the next slide. And this is an example from my multivariable calculus course, some of the standards that were in my syllabus. I started to do something that I think might be an interesting idea for some of you. I had an hour and 15-minute class, and I would teach a subject for the first 50 to 60 minutes, and then give a quiz every single day in class on the material we just covered. So that was the students' first opportunity to demonstrate mastery of the thing they just learned that day. And I thought it was really useful because the students were much more focused in class and active in class in practicing problems. Also, at that moment, when the student got their quiz for that day, if at that point they looked at the question and realized they just didn't know how to approach it, or they didn't feel comfortable, they could just opt out of that assessment because they will have another chance to demonstrate mastery on that later. And instead of sitting there for 20 minutes feeling bad that they don't know how to do the problem, they would come into the hall with me. And so then I'm multitasking. During class time, some of the students are taking an assessment, and some others who don't feel ready for that assessment are getting more help, more smaller group tutoring on how to do those problems, doing extra practice. So that everyday quiz format with like instant feedback and instant help if you're struggling, I thought was a useful innovation for me this year. Okay, that's all I have to say.
All right, next up, TJ.
Hi, everybody. My name is TJ Hitchman from the University of Northern Iowa. And since meetings are about learning what people look like so that you can see them and pull them out, I want you to know that's what I really look like on a daily basis, not that beautiful picture that Sharona must have picked out of some website somewhere. Okay. So I want to first thank everybody in this community and also in the IBL community. And, well, frankly, a lot of K-12 educators I know for inspiration, for helping me in all of this work. I think I first started doing this kind of stuff way back in the summer of 2012. I found a blog post where I was writing about it then. And I'm here to share some examples, but I want to caveat this with don't try this at home. The principal value of mastery grading for me has been that it's forced me to confront my values and challenge my assumptions about how school works, right? So please do that first and spend time thinking about how that is. If you pick up an idea here, that's great, but like, don't take it uncritically, please. Think about your context and think about your students. And I want to say one other thing before we do the official stuff, which is that by attending this conference, I'm starting to get a little bit of a back to normal feeling, and I hope you will join me in fighting that. We have some serious changes to make, even just in our own contexts, and now's not a time to forget. So the two classes I've been asked to talk about, the first one is a Specs grading kind of setup in an IBL Euclidean geometry class. There are lots of links in these slides, and you can go poke around for Easter eggs later. But the principal work the students do is all around finding and writing their own proofs. So everything is about process. So instead, I use a Specs grading through a class journal. The students write for the class journal, the students are referees for the class journal, and I bundle them together and I handle out the slides, I hand out the issues of the class journal during class. It's a really beautiful moment. From the student point of view, this looks like very little assessment because the only formal thing they do that looks like a test is the final exam, which is a week-long take-home final. And I bundle a CV assignment with that where they're supposed to just like write down which problems they solved and got published, right? So you can see lots of links for detailed information on this. Now, it looks like very little assessment, and part of the problem is that that gets rid of the idea of communicating clearly with your students. So it's really important that I take a couple of times during the semester to have a reflection assignment paired with a one-on-one meeting with every student. I ask them to write about their experience so far and where they think they are towards learning, and then and we talk about it just openly for 15 or 20 minutes several times. And in the end, the grade they get is really my professional judgment, and I have to work harder to talk to them about it so that we're all on the same page. And the final exam is really just a chance to change my mind. Okay, next slide, please, Robert. The other idea that I've been using a lot is in linear algebra, I've been bundling things. So I bundle in two ways. And for the students, this looks like lots of assessment. We have 6 or 7 days set aside in class for assessment opportunities. And the final exam is just one more big reassessment opportunity. All the topics are bundled together so that I have a vectors assessment, which is essentially a gateway quiz where they have to know how to do all sorts of things about the basics of vectors. They have to know how to form linear combinations. They don't have to draw vectors in 2 and 3 dimensions. They have to do linear combinations and graphically, things like that, right? And that's all bundled together into a single pass-fail gateway quiz. And then a second level of bundling is that for every letter grade, you earn a letter grade by passing so many specified versions of the assessments. And I've kind of put these together so that at each level, these are the sort of skills that I expect a student to leave the class with so then their next instructor wouldn't yell at me, right? This person got a C in linear algebra and they couldn't solve a system of equations. So that's one of the C level topics, and they're bundled together that way. This doesn't get to the extra structure that these lower level, that's a poor phrase there, that students in this class need. They need a little more structure. So I use a weekly homework report, which is an idea I stole from Joshua Bowman at some point. There's a link that you can see what one of those looks like, but you should probably go steal Joshua's. Okay, thank you very much.
All right, our next and final panelist, Sharona Skorinsky.
Okay, hi everyone. You guys have heard me talk about a few different things so far, but I thought I'd give you a little bit of my history with mastery grading just to give you a sense of where I fit in on my process. So I started in the spring of 2017 doing mastery grading, and I jumped off the deep end and converted Calc 2, Calc 3, and pre-calculus all at the same time. And then a year later in spring 2018, I like to say that I almost died due to grading overload from reassessments. So I definitely went on a quest to figure out how to not have 300 plus reassessments in the last week of classes. I also then decided it'd be a fantastic idea to take my coordinated course of 57 instructors across 80 sections and 1,400 students. No, I'm sorry, that first semester was like 2,000 students. Let's do mastery grading at that scale. And then I finally got around to figuring out what this token thing was all about. And so I'm on this panel to talk about my use of tokens and why I have left a little bit of Team Softy and regained my life in the process. So that's what I'm planning to talk about, if you guys ask about it, I should say.
All right, so that was a brief introduction. The rest of this time is going to be a Q&A, so please comments in chats, but questions in the Q&A. And I am going to start off the first question, and this is for the two ladies. TJ mentioned a drastically different model that he uses for two different types of courses. Is there any kind of like differences or changes that you guys use in the topics that you guys are talking about with the different level or types of courses?
Summer, do you want to take that or you want me to start?
Sure. I would say I find this mastery grading to be most essential and useful in the lower level courses and the ones that are for people who might be a little math averse, math traumatized. I really think the huge advantage of mastery grading is destigmatizing mistakes and allowing students to say, oh, you haven't learned that yet. And some of those are students who have never had a real success feeling about mathematics, and to force them to keep on the same subject until they do experience success, I really think is the huge win. But I have used it in some upper level classes, and I think it's less of a struggle there, and it's less of a struggle to get the students to buy in. So yeah, I don't teach proofs courses, but I do teach capstone courses where the students are writing papers, doing a semester-long project. And though I don't formally institute standards-based grading, I think that is essentially the same thing, because I'm giving the students feedback in weekly meetings about their project report and saying, you need to improve this part, you need to improve this part, bring it back to me. So.
Okay, well, in my case, I have only been teaching Calc 3 and below so far. I'm going to be taking my first stab at linear algebra this fall. So at least for now, I am entirely in the standards world. I don't do anything that I would call specifications, but I think that's definitely tied to the types of courses and the course content that I have. So I have not done anything separate.
All right, thank you. The next question is for you, TJ, and it comes from one of our attendees. And their question reads, I love the idea of peer reviewing publishing in a class. How do you deal with the fact that at first students are not reliable evaluators yet?
Oh, you're muted, TJ.
Sorry, the button is Z mod 2 and I keep hitting it. Yeah, okay. So in two ways. First, at the beginning of the semester, I'm the referee. I'm the only referee. I'm the managing editor for the class journal, and I'm the referee. And then I pick up students who are having some success and look capable, and I start giving them refereeing responsibilities. And by the end of the term, if things go well, I'm not a referee at all, and they are, all of the students. And then second, by giving them examples. So, and examples of papers that are good, examples of papers that are not so good, discussion about the process. You know, students have not published in a mathematical journal before. They don't know what math writing looks like. So you have to give them a lot of support to get through the details of that. Click some Easter egg links. You'll find some stuff.
All right. Ladies, did either of you want to chime in on this before we go to our next question? All right, then the next question, there's actually a few people, Sharona, that has asked just to hear more in general about the token system and how it helped to regain your life.
Okay. So what I discovered early in doing my mastery grading is that if I didn't put some limits on reassessments, they began to devalue the reassessments and not actually do the work in between reassessments to actually improve. So if they felt that they could just take it and take it and take it, they would take it, and if it didn't work, they'd throw it away and take it again without actually learning in between. So what I did is tokens create scarcity in my class. So I build in I do 2 times mastery. So they have to show mastery twice on a standard to get it mastered. I give them 4 automatic attempts. 1 is out of class, 1 is an in-class quiz, and 2 are reassessment quizzes. Beyond that, if they don't get a standard twice in those 4 chances, they have 2 other options. 1 is on the final. That's always the ultimate reassessment. But the other is they can use a token to reassess a single standard. So they get 1 token, 1 standard, 1 reassessment. So they're given 3 tokens at the beginning of the semester. And the only way to get more, they can get up to 4 or 5 more, is they have to do quiz corrections and reflection. So they take a quiz, and it has to be a quiz, not a reassessment quiz. They have to correct all their mistakes, but then they have to reflect and say, what did they do wrong during the exam? So not wrong before the exam. So it's not like I didn't study enough or I wasn't prepared. They actually have to say, what did they do wrong on the problem? It's, you know, I didn't know how to start it, or I read the problem wrong, or I made an arithmetic mistake. They have to locate their problem and reflect on it, and they can earn a token. So if I have like 25 standards in a course, they have a maximum of 8 individual reassessments that can happen. Well, they were happening in office hours. Now they happen as timed asynchronous quizzes on Canvas. And what has happened over the years is they don't actually even use all their tokens. They are getting better and better at knowing that they really want to get it done by that 4th reassessment. And the tokens get used at the end. And very, very few students actually need to use their tokens. So I think I did 15 or 20 reassessments total, and reassessments are like 1 or 2 problems, individual ones. And that's the only use for tokens. It's the only way to earn them. And I have a dummy assignment in Canvas, which I keep a score that is their current token count, and they're virtual. They don't have to do anything. And I kind of keep a running tally in that assignment where it says, hey, rewrote quiz 1, that's so +1 token, took a reassignment, -1 token. And I've just continually simplified it.
All right, so our next question is coming live from one of our attendees. Megan, if you would like to unmute yourself and ask your question to the panel.
Hi, yes. My question is kind of about equity in all of these kind of different systems. Thinking about, TJ, you mentioned the peer review, which is, I think, amazing, but also has potential as certain students maybe move into positions before others. Summer, you mentioned, how you manage those in-class quizzes and some students stepping out to review. And have you seen like power imbalances based on who those students are, or that kind of thing? And how have you maybe addressed it in your classes?
I'll have to think about that. My gut reaction is to say that I feel like the students who struggled the most in my class found this approach most humane, because they weren't sitting and staring at an exam thinking about how little they know and having to be in that room with all of that pressure, but instead they were being told, it's fine, you have another opportunity to learn these things. but I'm not inside their heads. So like, did they find it, did they feel pressured that the other students are watching them get more help? I don't know about that. That's a good question. Thanks.
TJ, did you have?
You first.
Okay. I think for me, it really comes down to the story of failure. And one of the most exclusionary practices that I find in mathematics is this assumption students make that I'm in mathematics because I succeeded, and that they can't because they have failed. And so I actually spent a lot of time at the beginning of the semester telling my story of failure, which some of you have heard about how many times I failed my qual exams, how many, that the only class I ever failed in college was a math class. And then we tie that to the fact that failing on an assessment in this class doesn't hurt you, it helps you. So for me, that's the big change, is that it's so okay to fail. In fact, it's not even okay, it's expected and wanted, because how are you going to get better if you don't take chances? So whether or not that's specific to certain demographic groups, or specifically whether it's Black students, I mean, I definitely have a lot of students who have failed my classes before. They fail before they get to me, and they'll tell me, wow, I never thought that I could get an A because last time I took this class, I got an F.
So in my IBL course, which is proof-based and has a class journal, I pay a lot of attention and I spend a lot of time on classroom climate and dynamics, right? The class is very heavily based on student presentation and whole class discussion. And so I have to do a lot of managing, and I have to pay very close attention to all of the things that are happening. And that's my principal job during class meetings. I'm a little, and I've learned to do that over the years. Well, I don't know, I hope so. When it comes to linear algebra, though, my system does involve a lot of reassessment, a lot. And that, that concerns me. And I teach at a primarily white institution, in fact, an overwhelmingly white institution. Like a more common thing for me is in linear algebra to have a bunch of high school students coming by at 3 p.m. at the end of their high school day to take a linear algebra class because I'm the local college. And so requiring reassessments for those students who are like, bust over from the high school 3 times a week is a tough thing. And I've been thinking really hard about that lately. I'm not sure where I'm at, but the point's well taken.
All right. Thank you. Yeah, definitely an issue that we're all still trying to figure out. The next question is for everybody. And the question is, have any of you incorporated group work on any assessments in your mastery grading or spec bundles? Any ideas on how that might be tackled?
So I have done some group work that I find very effective. Mostly in my case, I do it at the very end of, well, first of all, let me rephrase. I do an IBL type classroom, active learning. So we use groups the entire semester. But in terms of actually getting mastery assessments from them, I'm very much a believer in work together as a group, but get assessed as an individual. Except at the very, very end of the course, the last bit of content that's usually like the last week or two, which I just feel like I need to teach it, they need it, but there's really not enough time to get mastery. So I've sort of redefined for myself what mastery means. And it may mean they've just completed a group project. So I tend to do group projects that are very simple to describe, and participation by all the group members is enough for mastery, but they take it much further than I would expect. So I do one assignment where I ask them to create a closed parameterized curve and then spin that curve into 3 dimensions and to calculate different things, whether it's volume, depending on the class, volume, surface area, different things. And that's all I say. And they tend to really go above and beyond. Like they don't just take a circle and spin spin it. They make these elaborate things. And so it's pretty easy for me to tell that they really have participated in the project. And it's interesting because I consider it super low stakes, but because there's one shot, they tend to think of it as very high stakes. So there's a little bit of a disconnect there.
Okay, would TJ or Summer, would either of you like to respond?
I use group work, but that's only formative, and then all the assessments are individual, at least in the classes I've been doing it.
I generally don't use group assessments, although I guess in the course with a class journal, I sort of do, because the students are allowed to collaborate and they write joint papers just like we do. So, I mean, that becomes joint credit for both of them, just like it would for you or I or any other working academic. That's as close as I've gotten. I haven't tried anything else.
All right, thank you. Do have a question, I believe mainly for you, TJ. Could we get a definition on bundling and some thoughts about what it is meant to achieve?
I guess I'm using it as a way of talking about gathering together related content standards as a collective hurdle to be overcome rather than individual hurdles. And as I mentioned, I sort of do that in two ways. And why? Because it makes my workload more manageable.
All right. Our next question is more about tokens. So Sharana, this one's for you. How can I introduce tokens into my mastery-based, and I'm not sure, it says MBT.
Mastery-based testing.
Testing, there, thank you. System without things getting too complicated for students, remembering all the uses of tokens, and for me, keeping track of how many tokens each student has, knowing when to give tokens, etc.
Yeah, so one of the things that I'm definitely guilty of when I first started is, as a mathematician, I'm fascinated by patterns and all these complicated things. So my system was way too complicated to start. Luckily, by the time I got to tokens, I learned that. So there's only one use for tokens. There's only one way to get them. And there's only one assignment in Canvas where I track them. So they can always look up to see how many tokens they have left, although they tend to ask me rather than look it up. And again, all I do is I increment the score on that assignment up or down based on whether they turned in a a reflection or if they used one. And so it seems to work pretty well. I don't use tokens for anything else. I mean, again, tokens are just to reassess. They're just for one standard at a time. By the way, my reassessment quizzes usually cover many standards. So tokens are by far the most expensive way to do a reassessment, which is why the students don't use them until they've really tried on the assessment quizzes.
Would anyone else like to jump in on that one before I move on? All right, and this one is for the entire group. Every semester, I teach a discrete math course for non-STEM majors. My goal for this course is to help them learn to enjoy math and to see there is more to math than algebra and geometry. I am not preparing them for a next math course. Does anyone have experience doing mastery grading in a similar course, or would you recommend another plan for this course?
I think that's probably mine to start with. So Bosley and I do that.
Go ahead.
Oh, were you going to go, TJ? Oh.
No, you first.
Okay. So the statistics class that I coordinate and teach with Bosley in is it's a general education course, and it's a terminal course for not for non-STEM majors. So when we created the course, we really had to think about what the point of the course was. And the point of the course is to create critical consumers of statistics. So when we wrote our standards, all of our standards are always looking at it from a perspective of, we're not creating people who are gonna try to do statistics, but rather are going to be consumers. So yes, we have successfully done that. It really comes down to, how do you write your learning objectives? How do you write your standards? And then making sure that your assessments reflect the goals of the course. So I think it's an excellent fit for discrete math or any topic where there's not a set of skills they have to have coming out of it.
Okay, taking this in a different direction. If your goal is affective, if it's about how a student feels about mathematics, how do you master that? What does that mean? And if the student leaves your class not feeling great about mathematics, does that really mean that the student has somehow failed at something? So, like, if that's one of your goals, that's great. I agree with you. I just don't know that I want to make that part of a mastery-based grading system. I might want to make assignments that help drive that. I might want to think about measuring it to see as information for me about how I do course design and that kind of thing. But I'm not sure I'd ever want to incorporate that as part of a grade.
TJ, what do you think about mastering some of what the questions that Francis Sue brought up, the other pieces of mathematics, such as creativity?
Well, I mean, I can imagine having opportunities, and I can certainly imagine course designs where students have opportunities to demonstrate those things. Some are easier than others to measure, but some of them are the kind of thing where, like, as a practicing mathematician, you know it when you see it, rather than it's a thing that I can write 15 test questions on. So, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think that it's the case that even though this is not preparing the students for the next math course, that doesn't mean that we don't actually want to communicate some content about discrete mathematics. And to me, the goals of having the students enjoy mathematics, find beauty, all of those things, those can be sort of in our judgment of what aspects of discrete mathematics you want to cover and what applications you want to present. But I would still want the students to master or understand some content, because that's the mechanism by which they can appreciate mathematics. And I think standards-based grading would work great for a course like that.
All right, thank you. Our next question is also for you, Summer. And it reads, have you noticed a reduction in your ability to cover required content because of the time you are taking in class for reassessments?
I would say no. And, you know, I am not taking extra time in class for reassessments. There's something interesting about my 1 hour and 15 minutes is actually two 50-minute periods next to each other. So technically the students have another 25 minutes. So the ones who are taking a lot of reassessments are staying late to take those. So I think that a student who's having to take a lot of reassessments might need to use some out of class time to do that. And I don't think that I cover less material. I think that the time in class is much more useful when I'm doing these daily quizzes, because rather than my students wandering away mentally and thinking they'll learn it someday later, sometime they're gonna figure this out, they're actually focused on learning that thing at that moment in my classroom, and they tell me that it completely changes the way they approach being in my class.
And even though that question was targeted at Summer, would either of the other two panelists like to weigh in on it? Okay, then moving on to the next question. and this one is meant for the entire panel. What is the difference between standards and specifications?
I have no idea.
Are we gonna invoke Joshua Bowman at this moment? If we haven't already, let's do it again. Joshua, he's here? Hey, that's great. Okay, so I think Joshua summed this up pretty well in that standards-based grading is good for courses in which you are trying to teach large numbers of discrete skills. And specifications grading is more useful when you're trying to teach sort of larger, softer skill sets. That's a weird way to, that's the kind of language people use, but it's a little awkward. But like larger professional kinds of projects. So for me, I think of my class journal as a specifications grading kind of setup because the students are tasked with a large project, right? Find the proof of some theorem, settle a conjecture, convince their classmates, write a paper, revise the paper, get it published. It's a big, long process that has like 10 bazillion embedded skills. And as a professional, you kind of know how to say that's good enough or not. And so like you want to specify or describe what it means to do that thing competently, and then do your grading and your feedback based on that standard. And that's how I think of specifications compared to standards. And this is the part where Joshua will laugh at me in the chat.
I sort of use a analogy from the real world in the world of construction. Like if you're making a building, your standards are the building standards. Like you have to have so much strength in the walls, or you have to have, you know, things spaced a certain amount. And your specifications are, I want so many floors, or I want this kind of a space because I need to use it this way. So they both apply, but the standards are sort of more almost, I'd say, fundamental level. Like these are the basics of any building, and the specifications are, these are what this building is. It's sort of just a mental model for me. I don't know if that works for other people.
All right. Moving on, this question is for everyone, but Sharona, you might be a little bit more experienced because it's a question about doing this at large scale. So apart from gradebook management, which will probably come up in session 3A, what are some other things to watch out when taking mastery grading to large scale?
So there's two different ways to interpret large scale. One is having a lot of students in your class, and one is having a lot of classes doing the same thing. So I'm more familiar with the having a lot of classes piece, which is the biggest difference and the biggest learning piece is getting all the instructors in a room or on a Zoom together and doing what you might call normed grading, which is where you actually start grading student work together, and you have a discussion and come to agreement as to what mastery looks like for that particular problem. A lot of times, even though problems are very similar, you know, we're writing new problems all the time. And so we have to come to agreement on what does mastery look like so that we have a level of consistency and understanding of what mastery is. So planning for that time is really critical. In our case, we write we use Canvas heavily in a coordinated course in a blueprint. And so we write all the assessments, and they push out, they're literally identical to all the different sections, except for some versioning. And so then we have to work together as an instructor team. That's what's also helped us define our rubrics, because it has to be communicatable to all the instructors and getting everyone on the same place there. I don't know about, the largest class I've ever done this with is like a class of 35. So I'm not particularly versed in the large number of students side. But I would expect if you had graders or TAs in large classes, it behaves the same well as a coordinated course where you just need everyone to grade similarly.
See, would any of the other two panelists, Summer or TJ, like to chime in? All right, then I have another question from the Q&A, although I'm going to modify it slightly. And this is for the entire panel. Was/is it difficult transitioning, getting other instructors buy-in while incorporating mastery grading and/or token system?
I don't think that I so much required other instructors to buy into the system. I guess in my department, we have a culture of allowing each instructor to get their own grades. So I think it was much more of a struggle getting my students to buy into the system. And so it required constantly talking to them about why are we doing it this way and what does it mean for how they should approach the class. Constantly reminding them, you know, if you didn't do well on this, that doesn't mean that you're done studying that topic. That means you are going to go back and look at this topic again. And so just getting them into the new frame of mind took a lot more reminders than I thought.
I got buy-in backwards. I don't know that I would recommend it. And what I mean by that is we told them we were doing it and they didn't have any choice. And then we proved to them why this was a good thing. And we got the buy-in because we did most of the heavy lifting. The coordinators did it. So we did all the assessment writing. We wrote all the standards. We basically got it down to where the only thing they had to do, other than, I mean, they had to come up to speed on the course, but the only thing they had to do was grade. And we automated a lot of the homework grading. So we took a lot of the day-to-day labor of the course off of the instructors. And then we said, look, just go with us. Please trust us, go with us. And because their workload was so much less, they were willing to. And then over the course of a semester, another semester, 3 semesters, they've bought in over time. I don't know that I recommend that, but that's how we did it.
I think I'd agree. I don't have any experience like Sharona does with managing this across different instructors and one course. I would agree with Summer that I did much more buy-in work with students. And when it came to my colleagues and my administration, I'd already developed a reputation as being a little more radical and experimental with my classroom, and they'd all kind of written me off as, it's fine, he'll just handle it. So.
All right. Sorry, trying to stop laughing off that one. I love that answer. All right, and the next question is specifically to you, TJ. TJ, do your students know going into the midterm that it is a quote fake or formative? I also do fake midterms, but struggle with keeping it a secret or deciding whether it's important to keep it a secret. Instead of calling it a fake midterm, I call mine a redemptive final.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, well for me, the students do know. The students do know that particular course is designed and run almost entirely for pre-service teachers. I mean, not all of them, but that's the main audience. And they've already started coursework in, classroom assessment and how to do, run a classroom and all sorts of stuff related to teaching. They've already started thinking about it. So it's reasonable for me to be mindful of my job as a model, as an instructor, and to pull back the curtain at certain points. So I tell them most definitely, no, you can't study for the midterm. No, you shouldn't try to study for the midterm. Instead, you should just remember it's a formative assessment. I just want to see some things. That's it. We're going to come into class for an hour and you're going to take this thing that looks like a test, but it's okay. Just do your best. And I'm going to use that to help design some of the next questions I ask you. And that's it.
Thank you. Would either of the other two panelists like to chime in before I move to the next question? Okay, and then the next question is about tokens again. The last time I used tokens, students had a lot of conversations with each other and with me about how many tokens do I have left? What's the best way to use my tokens at this point? It felt like talking about points on a test again. How can tokens be used constructively without moving conversation away from what we want it to be about the learning?
So I don't know, Summer, TJ, have you guys used tokens at all? Yeah, I avoided them.
I had another strategy to address the same issue, you know, of students coming in to reassess, but they were really just throwing spaghetti at the wall and they hadn't learned anything in the interim. They just wanted to keep trying the question. Someday they were sort of magically going to find the answer. And so what I did was I required the students to bring me their homework, their completed homework on that topic. And almost always I would look at the homework, glance at it and say, okay, you haven't learned this, this, and this aspect. And then I would use that opportunity and have them sit down with me and do like a one-on-one tutoring and teach them what they're missing. But that is a lot of time input to do that, but it's time focused on the right aspect, which is getting them to understand the topic. So that's what I did. Instead of tokens, it was, you have to turn in your completed homework on this topic before you can take a reassessment.
And I think that's what we're saying in general with tokens or any other strategy. As much as we want to be, you know, letting them continue to reassess and reassess, if they don't do the work to actually learn in the meantime, the reassessments aren't actually accomplishing what we want. So however you are comfortable for yourself in requiring them to do some work to improve. I mean, it's one thing if they just made a stupid mistake, but the reality is if they just made a stupid mistake, they usually get mastery. So when they don't get mastery, it's because there's something more fundamental wrong. And tokens for me ended up being an easy way to communicate that. And also by making them so expensive to use. So.
All right, and then another very related question to the answers that both Summer and Sharona you gave. Can those who have used tokens speak about how to calibrate during the term and after the term to balance between too few and too many?
That's a good question. I had the interesting experience this semester of them not using their tokens. And it's very interesting also because they really want them. Like they want to earn the maximum and then they don't want to spend them because there's a little bit of that points thing in there. And again, because what they're doing to earn the tokens is so valuable, I'm fine with that. I find that if they don't have enough tokens, I can always just throw another reassessment out to the whole class. Like if I've done a poor job on an assessment, I wrote a bad question, or this class is struggling, I always have an opportunity to throw another assessment in there. And by the way, I feel like they learn the most while they're testing. So it's a really good use of my class time to be assessing. Like more than almost anything else I can do, they're spending the most time on task and really grappling with the questions while they're testing. So I'm okay taking another class period and doing another assessment.
Would you like to weigh in on that one, Summer?
I think the question was down too many and too few reassessments that you're grappling with. I mean, one thing I can do sometimes is if I'm getting a lot of requests, I'll group reassessments. I'll say, no, don't come in, don't make a special appointment. We're all going to do a reassessment on this topic in class on such and such day. And then at least it just saves my, you know, meeting and scheduling time to say, okay, well, 12 or 15 people are going to come and ask me to set up an appointment. We're going to all do that as a class.
Thank you. And the next question is for TJ. How does bundling make workloads more manageable? Are bundled outcomes evaluated at the same time?
For me, it makes it slightly more manageable because I'm doing less bookkeeping. Essentially, instead of tracking things like, let's take the vectors thing for instance, right? Inside the vectors, I think my individual standards are things like can add a pair of vectors, can rescale a vector, can form a linear combination, can plot vectors in the plane geometrically, can add vectors in the plane geometrically, can can think about scaling geometrically. Like there's a list of these, right? And instead of having a giant spreadsheet where I have like 75 standards to keep track of, it's really like, hey, you need to know stuff about vectors. And that's what I'm tracking. Now, in the reassessment process, you have to get a little more granular, or at least I found it, I need to get a little more granular, because essentially what will happen is maybe somebody will have a poor first attempt, but their second attempt is usually pretty close, and you can see that, oh, there's this one thing they need. And you really don't want to like make them take a whole nother 25-minute quiz when you just want to see one thing. So often, if I find a student has not availed themselves of the opportunity twice, then I will take a closer look, and I will speak with that student, and I will give them an alternate assessment to just hit the one or two things that I need to know about. And often I just let myself make that up on the spot, like to hit exactly the idea I'm after. Usually it's a short writing assignment to be done in the next 2 days.
Thank you. Before we move on, Summer or Sharona, would you like to also weigh in? All right, then the next question is for the entire panel. Has anyone tried to grade based on sustained mastery?
Well, my course that I was talking about before, where they're taking quizzes every day, it's a cumulative final, a comprehensive final, and the final exam grade is averaged in with the standards-based grade that's accumulated over the semester. So they have to be able to do well on most types of those problems at the end of the semester.
TJ, didn't we just have this conversation about how long mastery lasts a couple days ago?
Yeah, we did. In linear algebra, I don't look for sustained mastery simply because I'm trying to keep my workload down. Once is good enough. You've jumped the hurdle, and I'm going to pretend that's good enough. Even it bothers me a little that I don't, but that's how it is. In my geometry course, like, I mean, there's a final exam, which is like to go find 4 new proofs and write them up yourself and make them look nice. And that feels like a, I've given you the opportunity to practice over and over again, and now we're serious. So that feels like a sustained mastery sort of idea hiding in there somewhere. Anyway.
Well, I think I liked one thing you said when we talked before is that, how many of us have ever said we really learned a course when we taught it the first time? And if that's what we expect of ourselves, then how much more can we expect of our students? So my goal is if they master it, if they master the standard, so meaning they've mastered it twice in my class, I know that if they ever need it again, they can go back and recover the information pretty quickly. And so how long do they have to keep it mastered? Well, again, every piece of content is really going to get mastered when it's used with the higher level content. So as long as they've gotten it enough, for me, I'm good. I don't need it to sustain very long.
All right, thank you both, or thank you all three, sorry. Next question. What tips do you have on writing standards / learning targets that are fairly easily accessible?
Practice and revision. I think the word is accessible.
Yes.
Not accessible.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. I speak Bosley. What I found is I would write a learning target, and then I'd try to write a test question. And if I had trouble writing the question, which is, I think I saw Robert say this in the Slack, you should do a sample assessment on all of your targets, hopefully before the class starts, even if you don't get them all written. Because if you can't write a good question, you may need to revise the wording of your standard, and it becomes an iterative process. And I'm always refining my standards, not changing them, but refining the way they're worded, because I'm like, oh, that was a little bit too easy to look up, or, you know, this really didn't say what I meant for it to say because I wrote this great question that doesn't fit. So for me, it's an iterative process.
I was going to say that I start from a set of exams. I mean, I'm often teaching courses that have been taught a number of times before. So I would start from the questions, the things that we are going to ask our students to do, and then generate the standards from that list, sort of grouping questions and what types of things I might want to do. But I agree, it's really easy to miss the mark the first time you do this. I don't, and this is probably a deviation from best practices, but I don't give my students the full list of standards on day one. That might evolve over the term, so I might decide to change the standards as I'm teaching the content. I realize, well, actually, I'd rather group it in this other way. So they only really have the full list of standards after they, nearing the end of the course.
All right, then we are coming up to the end of our time. So I would like to give each of the panelists a minute to 2 minutes to kind of wrap things up. But before we do that, I would like TJ, there is a question still left in the Q&A if you have a chance to type an answer. And then also Sharona, there is one for you. That being said, I'd like to turn this over. Let's start with you, Summer, if you would like to give any kind of closing remarks or ideas.
No, just to say thank you to all the participants, because like I said, I am learning so much. I learned something from Sharona yesterday that I want to reiterate, which is if you are having trouble writing a collection of questions for the standard, maybe that's your indication that the standard needs to be rewritten. And I'm going to be using that next term as I think about, oh no, the only kind of question I can write is an exact repeat of the question I just asked. Okay, maybe I need to think about adjusting the way that I've written my standards. So thank you so much.
TJ?
Sorry, I'm multitasking. I was trying to answer the question in the chat.
I apologize.
I don't know how to sum up. I still feel entirely unsettled, and I don't know what to say. This is our chance. We're all here to think about doing things differently. Let's do some things differently.
Thank you. Sharona?
I think if I could give one big takeaway is if you look at my timeline, this is a process and it takes years to get all the pieces. And I really would encourage everyone, don't worry about getting it all right now. Learn from our mistakes, but understand that I'm in year 4, I think, of doing this. And I'm like listening to TJ, listening to Summer, listening to Kate all the time and changing things all the time because this is so new. It is hard to, I mean, it's just going to take us a lot of time, but it's so worth it that please, as Kate knows, I pushed her off the deep end one time when she thought she was going to go back to points. And like, just try it, just jump off the deep end. And it's okay if you're going to mess it up because our students deserve for us to try and fail and get better at it.
All right, then I would like to take a minute to thank all of the panelists. This has been a great discussion, but I'd also like to thank all of the attendees. You guys have been great with your questions. You made my job as moderator very easy. I only had to ask one of my own questions. So I hope everyone got as much out of this as I did listening to it, and look forward to seeing you all in our next parallel sequence of discussions in another 30 minutes. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.